once the webinar is complete, we'll post a recording of the webinar as well as the slides on our competition web pages. And so we are going to keep the participant lines muted throughout this presentation just to avoid any background noises or distractions. What I do want to point out, however, is that we do also, in addition to this webinar and the other resources that you've seen probably on the competition web pages and in grants.gov, we do all have an application support series for the discretionary grant programs that show up under the Effective Educator Development Division. And so you'll be able to see those at the link below. You'll also be able to find a link to those videos on the competition web pages as well. And then finally, as I mentioned before, we would love it if in the chat you would share your name, the name of your organization, and whether you intend to apply for the Academies program, national activities, or both, or if you're just not sure yet where you want to go with that. And so I will say before I turn it over really quickly that you'll hear primarily from me today, but we do have members of the American History and Civics team that are on the call with us as well, working in the background. And so Donna DeFino is with us today, and many of you probably are familiar with Donna for her work on the program. And Dr. Joshua Batchelor is someone that you probably are maybe a little bit less familiar with, but he also works on the program and is newer to the team. And then we also have Michelle Kennedy, who is not officially a member of the American History and Civics team, but also provides tremendous support for the program as well. And so all three of them will be working in the background to make sure that this presentation goes off without a hitch. And so with that, before we dive in, I am going to turn it over to our fearless leader, Venetia Richardson, who is the division director for the Effective Educator Development Division, to welcome you all and to set the stage for our webinar today. All yours, Venetia.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I can't say good morning anymore, so good afternoon, everyone. We are super excited to have you guys with us today. I'm looking at the participant numbers go up, and I am absolutely elated. We are here to talk to you about the FY23 American History and Civics Education Academies and National Activities Program, and hope that we will, for those of you who are undecided, motivate you to really follow through on this application process, because this is such an important body of work. I just want to start by, sharing with you guys the welcome and the appreciation from the department, the Biden-Harris administration, and the Department of Education writ large, for you taking the time to really take a look at this body of work. As you all know, with the last round of NAEP scores, civics education is really, really at one of its lowest levels in our history of this particular content in schools. And we are really trying to encourage the field to look at the opportunities that exist to support you in the work of delivering this curriculum and this content. Not only the content, but what's most important is that we are providing support to the educators that are entrusted with doing this work to better engage students and pique their interest in our fine American history, civics, and geography education. So with that, I just want to pretty much introduce you guys to, if you have not already, delved deeply into our NIA, but the American History and Civics Education Program is indeed designed to improve the quality of teaching and learning of American history, civics, government, and geography to some degree. And we are intending to support these programs and these content areas through the $23 million investment that the U.S. Department of Education under the Biden-Harris administration has made. One of the things that we are going to talk to you about is this opportunity that exists for up to $1 million per grant of funds to basically um, do any of these two bodies of work. We're going to talk to you today about the two programs. We're hoping to motivate most of you, if you are well equipped and well positioned, to apply to both. This is not a one or the other opportunity. This indeed is something that you can actually access both, which would give you $2 million of seed money to really further the work that you're doing in your respective institutions. So again, I just want to thank you guys for taking the time with us today. It's a long webinar, it's a long session, but we are intended that when this is over, you will have all the information that you need to be able to be successful applicants in this process. We are here to further answer any questions as you undergo this process. Orman will give you some information at the end of this webinar to explain to you all of the next steps, if indeed there are follow-up questions that will be needed to be responded to that we are not able to cover. Orman, I will turn it over back to you.
Thank you so much, Venetia. And Venetia's right. This is a long webinar, 90 minutes we have scheduled, but we do hope that it's going to be extraordinarily informative, and that you all are going to walk away feeling like there was value added, and that you're prepared and ready to move forward with those applications. So what you see on your screen right now is an agenda that kind of breaks down the plan for today. And so we're going to probably spend the first half or so of the session really kind of focused on the elements that are really common across both programs, right? The competition overview. We will talk about application parts and the structure of the application. We'll take a look at the selection criteria, which are the same for both programs. And then we'll talk a little bit about the performance reporting requirements, which also are the same for both programs. And then from approximately 12:45 until the end, we'll take a look at the sort of nuances between the different programs. We'll look at the priorities for each program. We'll look at the absolute priorities, competitive preference priorities. We'll talk about some of the specific differences between the academies and the national activities programs. We're going to break after the national activities program. We recognize that there's a lot of excitement, particularly around the national activities program, given the amount of additional funds, over previous years that have been sort of infused into that program. And so if there are folks who are here primarily for the national activities program, they will have we'll have a Q&A after we talk about those priorities. You'll have an opportunity to fall off if you so choose, and then we'll talk about the American History and Civics Academies program specific priorities and requirements, and then we'll also do another brief Q&A specific to that. So you're welcome to stick around for the entire webinar, but if you are here primarily just for the national activities, you will have that opportunity to fall off after that. And as I mentioned before, this entire webinar is being recorded. We will also post a copy of the slide deck to the competition web pages as well. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. Really quickly, a note about the webinar slides, and we try to make sure that this is clear. Please do keep in mind that the slides that we're going to present today are used to provide guidance only, okay? As I mentioned before, we'll publish a copy of these slides, but we really do want you to refer to the NIA. That's published in the Federal Register and published on our competition web pages. The application and instructions that you can find on the competition web pages and in grants.gov. And we want you to refer to those for complete competition requirements. And many of you are in higher education or represent, the teaching field. And, we always tell students, don't just pay attention to the class and take notes and think you're going to pass the test. We want you to make sure that you read the text, you read all the notes, you take a look at all the videos and all the supporting material. And so we do want you to really take a comprehensive look at all of the NIA information. We will breeze through some important pieces today because we just don't have time to really dig into everything. So the idea is really to make sure that, this slide deck and this presentation is going to be important. There's going to be far more information out there that you'll be able to find, related to these competitions. And so we'll start off with a brief competition overview. And so you heard Venetia talk a little bit about the purpose of these programs. And so both of these programs are authorized under ESEA Title II, Part B, Subpart 3, Section 2232 and 2233. And really, as Venetia mentioned, the purpose of these programs is really to effectuate the quality of instruction and the quality of student learning in the American history and civics, government, and also geography subjects, right? And really to try to foster and bolster, students' level of civic engagement and learning about, civic education. And so that's really the sort of the purpose and the crux of what these programs are about. And so on the academy side, it is a 5-year program with no opportunity for a grant, for a renewal of that grant. So it's a 5-year program. On the national activity side, however, national activities is a 3-year program, and there is the potential for a 2-year grant renewal. And so we'll talk a little bit about both of those things a little bit later on. But I am going to just pause, just Venetia, if there was anything else that you wanted to add to that.
No, that's fine. That's good.
Okay. That's good. And so let's just kind of walk through the competition timeline really quickly. So as you all know, the NIA, the NIAs, I should say, were published on April 28th into the Federal Register. The intent to apply, we're hoping that you all will submit notices, declaring your intent to apply for either or both of these competitions by May 30th. Applications are due July 12th, 2023 by 11:59 and 59 seconds p.m. Eastern Standard or Washington, D.C. time. And I cannot stress that date. We're going to stress that date and that deadline over and over and over today. Those of you that have submitted applications in the past, hopefully none of you have submitted late applications in the past, but if you have submitted a late application for a federal grant at the U.S. Department of Education in the past, you will know that we do not accept late applications. So we're going to stress that a couple of times today, just so that the point does get driven home. We do expect that there will be a tentative peer review period that'll be taking place sometime in late July to mid-August, and really the sort of expected time frame for making announcements of awards is sometime on or before September 30th. We do have to make the awards by September 30th, and so the announcements will be made sometime on that date or before. And so, we talked a little bit about the sort of historic funding levels for these programs, particularly on the national activity side. And so we expect for there to be approximately $2.9 million available for new grants in the American History and Civics Academies program, and that would be $2.9 million for the first year, okay, for FY23. And then we expect also approximately $19 million to be available for the national activities grants as well. And again, we're referring to first year. We expect about 3 to 5 new awards under American History and Civics Academies, and we expect about 25 to 30 new awards under the National Activities program. And then generally 300,000 to $1 million for academies, and 500,000 to $1 million in the first year or per year for the American History and Civics National Activities. And Venetia mentioned that note, and some of you may recognize that prior to this year, there was a cap of $500,000 on American history and civics grants. And so that cap has been doubled essentially. And so there's a lot of opportunity, a lot more opportunity, I should say, for applicants to really design programs that, that are a little bit more expansive and perhaps can have a broader reach than those grants, have been in the past. And then, as I mentioned before, the project period is months for academies grants and up to 36 months for national activities grants with the potential for a 2-year renewal. All right. And so let's just talk a little bit about eligibility requirements. And so the eligibility requirements are fairly similar across the two programs. For an academies grant, the eligible institution types or eligible entity types, are institutions of higher education and nonprofit organizations. On the American History and Civics National Activity side, it's IHEs plus nonprofit organizations, but also for-profit organizations are eligible to apply under national activities as well. And there is an expertise requirement for each entity type that applies as well. On the academy side, an entity will have to be able to demonstrate that they have, expertise with, historical methodology or the teaching of, American history and civics, right? And on the national activity side, an organization would have to be able to demonstrate that they have developed evidence-based approaches, really with the potential to improve the quality of American history, civics, and government, or geography, learning, and teaching. And so we'll talk in the next slide a little bit about what how to demonstrate the expertise of the organization, or how you will demonstrate that in your applications. But those are ultimately the requirements for each organization type. And so one of the questions we often get are, group applications allowed? And yes, group applications are allowed for both programs. So an institution of higher education would be able to apply in cooperation or in partnership with a nonprofit organization, and with potentially other types of entities as well, community partners or stakeholders, et cetera. However, you will be required to follow the procedures in 34 CFR 75.127 through 0.129, which really do focus on applications by group, groups of entities. Okay. And then the final thing that you'll see on the slide there is another question that we often get, and particularly this year, we want to really kind of hone in on is, whether or not LEAs are eligible to apply as the lead applicant on an American History and Civics grant. And the answer to that is no. LEAs are not eligible to apply as a lead applicant. However, we are absolutely really encouraging partnerships between, the eligible entity types, institutions of higher education, nonprofits, et cetera. Okay. And so, as I mentioned on the last slide, one of the things that we do want to, just spend a little bit of a moment discussing are the, requirements around documenting demonstrated expertise. And that's one of the critical requirements, is ensuring that, an entity that is applying for a grant under this program or under these programs actually has the ability to really to plan and carry out the activities under the grant. And so applicants are required to demonstrate expertise. And the way that you will do that is through Appendix B of the other attachments form. And so we're going to get into the application parts shortly, but there is a specific section that is intended for applicants to provide the department with specific documentation that speaks to their ability to demonstrate, expertise in the development of activities related to these programs. And so, so the first thing that is possible to be sent as evidence is the organization's mission statement. The organization's mission statement may clearly indicate or clearly demonstrate that the purpose of that organization is to do the type of work that would that falls under these programs, that falls within the scope of these programs. Another type of example would be samples of current or previous work that the applicants completed, any types of professional development or other educational trainings that have been provided as well, any samples of the applicant's work that they've done to sort of like develop evidence-based approaches to teaching and learning history and civics would be acceptable as well. The resumes of project staff or proposed or intended project staff that really demonstrate strong background and experience in history and civics is another form of evidence that can be presented as well. And then of course other types of sample artifacts created by the applicant that really support the expertise in this area would be important as well. And so it's not required, applicants aren't required to provide all of the above. They're required to provide one or more of the above. But obviously, the more expertise that you provide, the stronger an application is going to be. And so we're going to jump into the parts and the structure of the application now. And so the application is broken into 5 primary parts. There's the ED standard forms, which those of you that have applied for federal assistance will be familiar with. There's the ED abstract narrative. There's the project narrative. And then there's the EED applicant budget worksheet, which is specific to the effective educator development division. It's not the sort of the general form, the general budget form that you may see with other grant applications at the department. And then there's the other attachments form, which I alluded to on the previous slide. And so the application that you will find in grants.gov is generally aligned to these sections. So you're able to, upload documents into each form that really, sort of align with this structure. However, we want to make sure that you put the right things in the right places. Okay, and so we're going to walk through a little bit, what actually falls within each of these parts, so that you're certain that when you're uploading information into these documents, you're putting the right things in the right places. Because ultimately, we want the application to be cohesive and organized as identified above. And so the first thing that I want to really walk through are the ED standard forms. Okay. And so this is a standard set of forms that shows up in most applications at the U.S. Department of Education for discretionary grant funding. There's the application for federal assistance. There is the Department of Education supplemental information form, SF24. There's a Department of Education budget summary form, sections A and B, which provide a high-level breakdown of the budget. There's the disclosure of lobbying activities, the general education provisions, GEPA requirements, section 427, and I'll share a note about that one on the next slide. And then, of course, there's the assurances for non-construction programs, and then, of course, the grants.gov lobbying form. And so, as I mentioned before, these are standard forms that you will fill out and make sure that you're completing, and you will upload those into part 1. There's a form, part 1 Ed standard forms, and you will simply upload each of those documents there. But you'll upload each of those documents with the exception of the GEPA requirements section 427. And this is an update that I just want to share with you all. There has been an update to that form. And in the past, it's been a PDF document that applicants have filled out and uploaded to the, to this Ed standard form section. Recently, it was converted to an electronic submission. So you will actually complete the form electronically directly in grants.gov, and it will be embedded into the application. So you will no longer have to submit a PDF document that has the GEPA requirements there. I also included on this slide some links to some additional resources on this as well. So if you're interested in understanding a little bit more about the update or just understanding about how to fill out that form, there's a page here that has lots of different trainings. But then there's also a specific training here just to make sure that you understand how to fill out that GEPA requirement Section 27 form as well. Right. So the second major part of the application is the Ed Abstract narrative form. So now we're kind of starting to get into the meat of the application. And the Ed Abstract narrative form is a one-page document that will essentially summarize your project. It should be limited to about 2,000 characters. As I mentioned, it's a one-page document. And we want it to be organized to include the following pieces of information. It should include the name and the eligibility classification of each applicant. So if you're an institution of higher education, the name of your institution and also the fact that you are an institution of higher education should be clear. We want you to include the names of all participating LEAs, state education agencies, the Bureau of Indian Education, if the Bureau is a participant, if there are any BIE, any Bureau of Indian Education schools that are participating, if there's a nonprofit or for-profit organizations that are involved in the project as partners. Just make sure you list anybody who is an affiliate with you during that during the work on the grant or in the proposal. And then you also want to indicate if the application is from a single eligible applicant or it's a partnership. So we kind of spoke to that already. And then you want to make sure that you describe the reach of the proposed project. Talk to us a little bit about how many teachers, how many schools is the work touching? How many teachers are involved? How many students are going to be directly impacted by the work that you're proposing in your project? And then provide us with a summary statement, of the work. Ultimately, a project description, and really speak to the objectives and also the activities that you plan to carry out. And then finally, you're going to want to provide us with an identification of the competitive preference priorities. And I'm not sure why, but my slides keep slipping. So if you can just bear with me, I'll bring it all back up. But you want to make sure that you are also addressing the competitive preference priorities, so that it's very, very clear in the abstract exactly which competitive preference priorities, if any, you are planning to apply for. And so then, and now we really, really get into the meat of the application project narrative, right? And so the project narrative, your project narrative should be uploaded to the specific Part 3 application project narrative form that you will find in the application on grants.gov. It really should describe your proposed approach to addressing the absolute priorities and the other required elements if funded. It should also demonstrate how you're planning to address the competitive preference priorities as well. And so a couple of things you want to make sure that you include, obviously a table of contents. It shouldn't be more than one double-spaced page. It should respond to, as I mentioned before, the absolute priorities, selection criteria, any requirements like application or statutory requirements that are found in the NIA should also be addressed there. And then, of course, there should be clear headings in your application narrative or your project narrative that really do help the department staff and the peer reviewers to match the narrative with the selection criteria. It's not a requirement. We can't require that you do that, but I can speak from experience that it does certainly help out peer reviewers when your application clearly cross-references with the selection criteria. Um, we'll encourage you, again, there's no requirement. We can't require you to limit your project narrative to 40 pages, but that is something that we definitely encourage applicants to do. And I can, again, speak from experience that, applicants who are able to keep their project narrative within that sort of 40-page range do certainly help out peer reviewers because they do have a tight time window to conduct all the reviews and to be able to take all the notes. And if you're able to succinctly describe your project within that 40 pages, that usually is more than enough. Right. And so let's dive into the EED applicant budget worksheet. And so this is a budget worksheet that was cleared by OMB a few years ago for use on effective educator development programs. So if you've never applied to an American History and Civics grant before, or have not applied to an application or a grant within the effective educator development in the last few years, this may be a new program for you. Sorry. My apologies. Looks like somebody's trying to hijack my slides here. All right. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the sections of this budget worksheet. And so sections A and B are quite familiar to you. If you've submitted, again, an application for this program or others within the effective educator development division or other programs at the department, the section A and section B are going to look very similar to what you submitted for your budget in the past. They're going to ask you to provide the requested amounts for each line item: personnel, fringe, travel, supplies, equipment, on down the list for each year of the grant. Okay. 5 years if we're talking about American history and civics academies, 3 years if we're referring to a national activities submission. Okay. On section B, this section is really primarily for American History and Civics Academies applicants, because that program does have a 100% matching funds requirement, cost share requirement, that we'll talk about a little bit later. But that requirement does not exist for the National Activities Program. So national activities applicants are not required to submit anything under sections B and C, because those sections really are focused on the cost share, the matching requirement that exists for the Academy's program. Okay, and so for those of you that will be submitting an application for the Academy's program, it's very similar to Section A. Section B is very similar to Section A. You're providing the amounts of cost share for each line item for each year of the program. And the difference here is, instead of reporting the requested amounts, you're just reporting the amount of funds that are committed for each of those line items for each year of the grant. Section C, again, for Academy's applicants, is going to give you an opportunity to describe to the department the sources of the non-federal matching funds, whether these funds are coming from a philanthropic source, whether they're coming from local funds, whether they're coming from cash or in-kind sources. We're going to give you an opportunity to provide for us an indication of where those funds are coming from, but then also answer some validating questions that help us to determine whether or not the source of funds is an appropriate source of funds. And so we're going to ask you to walk through that worksheet and provide the source of funds, and then answer the questions along the top that really do speak to whether or not these are appropriate sources of funds for each of the line items, the budget line items as well. And then Section D really does get into an itemized budget breakdown. It is an itemized budget breakdown section. We're asking applicants to provide us with a detailed breakdown of each of the amounts that are requested under the budget categories. So we're asking you to tell us what are the key positions that you're planning on including in this proposal and in this grant if awarded funding. A project director, an implementation manager or an implementation specialist, instructional coaches, administrative assistants, any personnel that will be hired as a part of this grant or whose salaries will be fully or in part funded by this work should be listed there. And we're going to be asking you to provide us with their salary, their overall salary, the percentage of their salary that will be funded by the grant. And we're going to be asking for you to provide us also with, information on the fringe benefits as well for those individuals. We're also going to ask for information about travel expenses for you to really break down any travel expenditures, any supplies and equipment that need to be purchased on behalf of the grant, any contract work that you may have, whether you're building out data systems to track some of the data, hiring an evaluator, any of the types of contractual services that may be a part of your grant. We're going to ask you to break those down. If there are training stipends or other expenditures, we're going to ask you to provide all of that information as well as indirect costs as well. And all of those things are going to help us to validate the total amount of funds that you are requesting for your grant. And so that's what that section D is really asking for, is really, really asking for you to provide us with all of that detail that's going to help us, to determine the feasibility of your budget proposal and your budget request. And then finally, section E is the narrative justification. So you've given us the breakdown that speaks to, all of the different, funds, the expenditures, the need for the dollars and cents. But then the narrative justification is gonna give us the why. It's the rationale as to why you need those funds in order for the project to be successful. And so what we're really asking for you to do is to really provide that justification for each project cost, for each budget line item that really does speak to the need, not just the need, but also the allocability and the allowability of each of those grant activities. And so I'm going to pause there. And Venetia, I'm going to ask you if there's anything you wanted to add to that section. I know that's something that we talk about a lot in EED, and just want to give you an opportunity to say something if you think anything should be added there.
The only thing that I want to just emphasize here is that this is really an important component to the application process, in that we really want applicants to take a major look at how they're proposing this up to $1 million project. Be very diligent about the actual cost, the number and quality and types of activities, and the associated investment to those. One of the reasons why we are emphasizing this specific section is that the application of the grant, the application to receive the grant is one component, and if you are awarded, this becomes the sort of major piece of the grant life, the life of the grant that you will have, that really determines major aspects of its success. So we really want to emphasize that this is a critical area as you are planning out this project, to really take a concerted look at all of the things that you are speaking to. This is also an area that peer reviewers, the folks who will be reading these applications and reviewing, are making connections between the viability, and the benefit to the investment in how you put this section together.
Yep. No, that's well said. Thank you so much, Venetia. All right. And so I mentioned a little bit about cost principles earlier. I mentioned allowable, allocable and reasonable expenses. And so, and Venetia kind of hit on that, right? Like, really, we really, as you're developing your budget, you really do want to make sure that the proposed expenditures do meet those thresholds of allowable, allocable, and reasonable. And so we just included a couple of little definitions here for what those things mean, right? Allowable expenditures are, costs that are, permitted under the American History and Civics Academy and National Activities Program statute, and or OMB circulars. So basically, any of the sources of official language that speak to how federal funds can be spent, and particularly how American history and civics funds can be spent, are the things that you should be paying attention to make sure that your budget is meeting those appropriate thresholds. And then allocable expenditures are the things that are specifically for the operation of your project, right? And when I say of your project, I don't mean of an American history and civics project, but I literally mean for your project, right? As designed and as written. So allocable means that you are able to use the funds in that way because the application was written and designed, the project was designed in such a way to allow for that expenditure. And then finally, reasonable really just means that the cost for an expense is comparable to market prices. But it also means that the overall request for the project is appropriate for the scope of activities, right? So it's kind of like the idea of, don't ask for $1 million for a $500,000 project, right? Like you should ask for the right amount of funds to really support the scope of work that you are seeking to to implement through the grant. So we just want to make sure that that note was covered and that it was really, really clear. When, after applications are submitted, after peer reviews are conducted, department staff will dive into applications that are within funding range, the top ranked applications within funding range, and we will conduct a thorough budget review. And so you help yourselves, obviously, by providing projects that are well budgeted and well planned from a fiscal standpoint, because it just allows us, when we get to that stage of the process, to be able to cleanly and efficiently assess the quality of the budget and how it relates to the overall activities of the grant that are proposed under the project. Right. And then the last part of the application that I'm going to speak to is the other attachments form. And so the other attachments form is really where you are going to put all of the other stuff, right? That is going to support your overall project. It's where you will save your logic model under Appendix A. I mentioned before that you're going to provide documentation of your organization's expertise in the development of approaches that meet the sort of requirements of each project. It's where you'll provide resumes of key personnel, your current approved indirect cost rate agreement. It's where you'll include letters of support and MOUs from partners, if applicable. The intent letter for academies, applicants, that really sort of speaks to the organization's ability and intent to meet the matching funds requirement that I spoke to a little bit earlier. It's also where you can provide any kind of proprietary information, things that an application will want to sort of conceal in the event that the application is awarded funding. And so those of you that have received grants in the past recognize that we do publish the project narratives on our webpage. So if there's any information that's proprietary and that you want to make sure does not show up in the in the project narratives and doesn't get published, you would provide that under Appendix G in the other attachment form. And then if there's any other documents that are applicable that aren't listed in A through G, you'd include those things. And of course, the optional American History and Civics applicant checklist as well is Appendix I. And so what we're asking is that you will label and organize attachments this way. Again, every little bit of sort of organization that you can put into your application will help us on the sort of program side and our peer reviewers to conduct a really, really efficient review that that is timely and also is able to help us meet our deadlines. And just a couple of quick notes on application submission. And I mentioned before, probably a couple of times, that all applications are going to be submitted electronically in grants.gov. Applications are due no later than, I think we have the wrong date here. That looks like the wrong date. That should say July 12th, 2023. And we'll make sure that we get, when we publish, you'll get a version of this that has the correct date in there. But applications must be submitted no later than 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on July 12th, 2023. So take a note. And then they need to be fully uploaded and submitted with a date and timestamp by the grants.gov system by the deadline. And so I cannot emphasize these last 2 points enough. Late applications will not be accepted. That's the reason why it's so important that you make sure that you are checking for that timestamp from the grants.gov system. If the application comes in at 12:00 EDT on July 13, it is technically a late application, even if it's 1 second late. We are not able to accept it. And I tell the story all the time of an application when I oversaw the TSL program recently, an applicant that submitted less than a minute late. And it was heartbreaking because we know they put a lot of work into the application, but unfortunately, we were not able to accept that. And we just are not able to accept, we will not accept a late application. So here's a couple of tips right here. Tip 1, start early and submit early. And as I mentioned before, make sure you get that timestamp, certification or validation from the grants.gov system. That really does, indicate to you and provide you with evidence that your application not only has been submitted on your end, but was received by the system. Because if it's not received by the system, you will have to go back and resend it and resubmit it. So you want to make sure that you get that. But I cannot emphasize enough the importance of starting early and submitting early. And so this application was published with a 75-day application period, which many of you know, often application periods are more like 60 days. The opportunity was given, to you all to make sure that you had enough of a chance to really put together really strong applications and really kind of work with your partners. And so you have 75 days. Our recommendation is for you to really start now if you haven't already and submit early. Pay attention to the formatting requirements outlined in the common instructions. And so you'll see a link here. You'll also see the link in the NIA, and you should also see a link on our competition pages as well to the common instructions, just to make sure that you're familiar with the appropriate formatting for these applications. And as I mentioned before, I'll say it again, just make sure you get that validation email from grants.gov after you submit. If you don't see it, if time passes and you don't see that certification or that validation email, then you will probably want to send it again. And it's not going to count against you if you submit multiple versions of the application. We do screen for duplicates, but you do just want to make sure that that you do get that grants.gov certification. And so what I'll say is, if you have questions related to the competition itself, American history, about an absolute priority, or what have you, eligibility requirements, etc., feel free to send those questions to American History and Civics at ed.gov. But if you have questions about grants.gov, my team is not going to be able to really help you with that. And so we're going to direct you to the grants.gov support team at support@grants.gov. As you can see on the screen, you can also see their telephone number, which is 1-800-518 4726, they're going to be the ones who are going to be able to support you with any questions that you have around the actual use of the system. The fact that you didn't get a verification email or any outages with the system. Do be mindful. We did put in the application instructions and on the website and right here in the slide, there is going to be an outage from June 17th through the 19th on grants.gov. So if you're planning to submit then, you'll want to either do it a little bit before or a little bit after. And if you're planning to be working in the system in the workspace that they have set up in grants.gov, then it'll be down during those times as well. So anything that's specifically related to grants.gov, you're just going to want to make sure that you reach out to them directly for those questions, because my team will not be able to support you with any questions that are specific to to the application system. All right. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about the competition selection criteria, and then we're going to start going into priorities after that. All right, and so just a couple of quick notes about the application selection criteria. So so as I mentioned before, the selection criteria and the possible points are the same across both American history and civics programs. And so we have the same criteria, which I will walk through in a moment. Applicants for both competitions should really, as I mentioned before, carefully consider the selection criteria when drafting the applications. They're there for a reason. They're there for you to have insight into what the peer reviewers will actually be reviewing your proposal against. So I can't tell you how to apply, but if I were applying, I would probably structure my application so that I am clearly addressing each of those selection criteria, as well as the sub factors within them as well. The maximum total score for selection criteria is 100 points. Each of the programs has slightly different point totals for the competitive preference priorities, but for the selection criteria, there is a maximum of 100 points for those. And so we will, as I mentioned before, be convening panels of reviewers who will review the applications. They are external peer reviewers, and so they're not Department of Education employees. And they will, as I mentioned before, review each application against the selection criteria and the competitive preference priorities. Any points or weights assigned to the criteria are indicated in parentheses. So you'll see that as well. And you'll have a sense of not only what's the maximum number of points for each selection criterion, but you'll also see what the maximum points are for each sub-factor of the criteria. And then again, just a reminder, make sure you read the full text of the selection criteria in the NIA as well. And so the first selection criterion is the quality of the project design. As you can see at the top, it's worth a maximum of 20 points. And so the project design is really sort of the core of the proposal, right? It demonstrates the rationale for the project and really outlines the objectives of the project, what activities are going to be completed, and the services that will be performed. And so we will be evaluating applications based on the extent to which the project demonstrates a rationale. And so the threshold for these programs is demonstrates a rationale, the evidence threshold. And basically what that means is each program should have a logic model, and it should also have a substantive definition that really speaks to the various components of the logic model design, and also how that sort of rationale weaves its way into the proposed project strategies. And the second sub-factor is the extent to which the proposed project represents an exceptional approach to the priority or priorities established for the competition. And so each of these sub-factors is worth 10 points each. And as I mentioned before, that totals to a 20-point total for the quality of the project design. The second selection criterion is need for the project, and this one is worth a maximum of 25 points. And really, the need for the project, establishes, why the proposed services of your proposed project are needed. It also identifies the gaps and deficiencies in the target areas. And so there are three sub factors for this one. The magnitude or severity of the problem is obviously something that we will be heavily looking into, and that's worth 8 points. And then the extent to which specific gaps or weaknesses in services, infrastructure, or opportunities have been identified and will be addressed by the proposed project. And that would include the nature and magnitude of those gaps or weaknesses. And so again, as you can see, like we're really trying to establish and identify the need to which these projects are used in the target area. And then, of course, the final one is the extent to which the proposed project will focus on serving or otherwise addressing the needs of disadvantaged individuals, and that one is weighted at 10 points. And so again, these total to 25 points, and each one has a maximum point total that you can see there on the screen. The third selection criterion is quality of the management plan, and this one really does establish how the project will be implemented, and it describes the objectives that'll be accomplished, right? Key timelines, key benchmarks. It also highlights who are the personnel, who are the individuals that are going to be working on the project, what are their qualifications, and so there are two factors for this one. The first is the adequacy of the actual management plan, right? To achieve the objectives of the proposed, project, making sure it stays on time, within budget. And again, as I mentioned before, really making sure there's a clear timeline, there's clearly defined responsibilities, and that there are, milestones for accomplishing the project tasks. And this item right here is worth 13 points. Okay. And the second one is really ensuring that there are adequate procedures for ensuring feedback, and also continuous improvement in the operation of the proposed project. So not just making sure that there are timelines, responsibilities, and effective staff, working on this project, but also that there are structures in place, or at least proposed structures in place, to ensure that that you really are operating from a place of continuous improvement and able to, make pivots and course corrections when needed. And so that item there is worth 12 points. And so again, quality of the management plan is worth a maximum total of 25 points. And then finally, last but certainly not least, is adequacy of resources. And when we talk about adequacy of resources, we're not just talking about the resources necessary to implement the grant, but we're also thinking about the plan for what happens after federal financial assistance ends on the project, right? So we're talking about the adequacy of support, including facilities, equipment, supplies, other resources from the applicant organization, basically all of the stuff that you need in order to be able to effectively implement a federal grant project of the size and scope of the work that you will be proposing to accomplish. We're also looking at the extent to which the costs are reasonable. And so I mentioned in a previous slide, really looking at the cost principles and speaking to the reasonableness of the cost in relation to the scope of the work, right? The objectives, the design, and the significance of that project. And then, as I just mentioned, right, the extent to which the applicant demonstrates that it has the resources to operate the project after the federal funding ends, right, beyond the length of the grant, including a multi-year financial and operating model, and an accompanying plan. And so all of these things are essential to the proposal. And then finally, the relevance and demonstrated commitment of each partner in the proposed project to the implementation and success of the project. And so not just are we looking at the applicant organization's ability to really provide the necessary types of resources, but we're also looking to see a sort of a demonstration or some type of establishment of the partner's ability to truly commit the resources to making sure this project is successful as well. And so, as I mentioned, adequacy of resources is worth 30 points. And so we want to, obviously, we obviously are putting a lot of emphasis into this aspect of the project as well. And so really briefly, here is a sort of table that kind of shows the point distribution. As I mentioned, along the selection criteria, they all total 100 points, and they all have the same selection criteria and the same maximum point values. And where there is difference, and we will kind of walk through the CPPs, the competitive preference priorities, momentarily, but there is some difference in terms of the priorities themselves and the amount of potential additional points that are available there. All right, and really quickly before I go into the priorities, I am going to speak to a little bit of the performance reporting and just really, really briefly touch on it. There is a performance reporting requirement. So for each year of the grant, if an applicant is awarded funding, they will be required to provide an annual performance report. Okay, and the annual performance report really provides detailed financial information, describing their actual project expenditures and also their projected expenditures as well. And they will also be required to provide GEPRA, Government Performance and Reporting Act data, I should say performance data on their progress meeting program performance measures, as well as the project measures that were developed specifically for the grant project as well. And so that happens each year of the grant, of the sort of grant project's life cycle. And then at the end, there is also a final performance report that really summarizes progress meeting, grant objectives across the entire lifespan of the grant. And so those are requirements for reporting on this project. And so the GEPRA performance measures for each year of the project, as I mentioned before, grantees are going to provide, an APR, and they'll have to demonstrate that they meet the following measures. On the Academy side, there are two performance measures, two GEPRA performance measures. The first is the average percentage gain on an assessment after participating in the Presidential Academy. So really, it's speaking to a pre and a post assessment, an assessment that happens before engagement in that Presidential Academy, and a post assessment that really is assessing educators or teachers, proficiency in the subject matter afterward. And then for the congressional academies, it's the average percentage gain on the assessment after participation in the congressional academy. And I haven't talked about priorities yet, but the congressional academies really do focus on student engagement. And so there would be a pre-assessment and a post-assessment there as well. Very similar on the national activity side. It's looking for the average percentage gain on an American history and civics and government or geography and or other related assessment after participation in the grant activities. And so slightly different structure to the national activities program, but the same concept of getting that pre-assessment and that post-assessment is how we will measure progress from the GEPRA measures there. And so we definitely encourage applicants to really start thinking about how you're going to structure and design your projects to make sure that you're able to capture this type of information. That should be a part of the application approach. And then So we'll talk really, really quickly about project-specific measures. And so I mentioned the GEPRA measures, but in addition to the GEPRA measures that are specific to the program, each applicant should have measures, project objectives that are specific to their project, right? And so your application should include a list of those project-specific measures. It should also include performance targets for each measure during each year of the project, as well as a plan for how the performance data will be collected. And so these are items right here that applicants are going to want to make sure get folded into the application as well. And so we're going to kind of just keep moving right along, just in the interest of time. I'm going to talk a little bit through priorities. We'll start off with a quick overview, but then go ahead, Benicia.
Can we just stop for a second and respond to questions that came up from the previous slide?
Yeah.
So let me start. I answered some, so if I answered your questions, I'm going to skip over them.
Yeah.
Although the standard B form on the 524 is required, but there's a question around the American history because the national activities. No, there is no match requirement there. So, question is about leaving it blank, or not included. How is this? Do we leave it blank, or?
Yeah, that's generally the way it's approached. Yeah, and yeah, thank you for raising that question. So yes, if they're for the national activities, so the way that the form shows up, it's a two-page form. It's a standard form in the grants.gov system. For a program that does not have a matching requirement, the grantee would just fill out the section A part, but they would leave section B of that blank. And I hope that answers the question. I think, at least as I heard it. Yeah.
40 pages. I think we said 40 pages instead of 50.
40, yes.
Maximum recommended.
Yep.
So we have 50 reflected on the website.
Do we have 50 on the website? So we'll have to make a correction.
Comment.
There.
Yeah, the comment.
Okay.
That's the comment. Oh no, I lost my place. So I'm skipping because I answered some of you guys.
No worries.
So clarity, I got that. Oh, there's a question about for national activities, are funds allowed to be used for snacks or after hours professional development? So I didn't answer that because I do think that's an important question to pose to respond to all. So food, the use of grant funds for food is generally and most often not allowed, will not be permitted. There are some very finite exceptions, and so that all has to do with the way that that is written up within the construct of what you're requesting. For the most part, the answer would be no. There is some, and I don't want to answer this specifically only because it could be a working lunch. I mean, it could be a working activity, which it sounds like that's what this is speaking to, but that is sometimes very hard to demonstrate. And so there is always some digging in that has to happen with questions around the use of federal dollars for food. And so wanted to cover that because that is definitely something that we don't 99% of the time will not approve.
Right.
All right. Let me go to the next one that I thought grants.gov. So section D for the budget narrative or include. So should section D of the be attached as an optional narrative or included as part of the mandatory budget narrative? Attach when we are, or should we attach, I guess, when we are uploading?
So can you repeat that? So
Looking at the
we're,
application package in
yep.
grants.gov, the forms are the same as the past years. Should Section D be attached as an optional budget narrative or included as part of the mandatory budget narrative attachment when we are uploading?
Yeah, it should be. So you're referring to in section in part three, the EED budget form, or maybe if you could come off mute,
Come off
whoever
mute.
asked that
Yeah.
question.
Either way, it's going to be uploaded, but
Yeah,
I
it's gonna.
don't
Yeah, I was gonna say
understand.
it's gonna be
Yeah,
uploaded either
that's,
way, but I just want to make sure I'm clear on
yeah.
which part we're
Yeah,
referring to.
on that one form for budgets you were talking about,
Uh-huh.
there was a section D. I'm trying to find that slide now.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
But it was like like an Excel spreadsheet, it sounded like.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But when you go into the application package, there's only one thing for budget narrative to upload. So do we include that as part of the overall budget narrative, or is it supposed to be attached separate as there's a button there for optional? So does it go
Oh,
there, or
got
does
it.
it go as part of the mandatory?
It should go as part of the mandatory. Yeah, because that's a required form. And so yes, you would, upload that Excel file. And I know in the past Excel files have been a little bit tricky for grants.gov. And so, but you are able to submit it as an Excel file, and it is a mandatory document as well.
Okay, but section E says budget narrative, which would be a more, I guess, developed in a doc or whatever. So there's no place to attach two. So does one go as mandatory,
Yeah.
one goes
Yeah. So
optional?
the intent of the form is that you're going to provide your narrative in the Excel file. So in section E. So there's sections A, B, and C that we walk through. Section D is the detailed breakdown that sort of gets to what I spoke to about, like all the different personnel lines, the fringe lines, all the travel expenditures, et cetera. You're providing a sort of a granular look at your budget. And then section E is where you will provide that narrative information. So it shouldn't be a separate document. It should just be one thing, basically.
So there shouldn't be technically narrative in the Excel file. It should
There
just be the
shouldn't be a
numbers for
separate
breaking.
document that's a narrative. Yeah. Well, yeah, there should be narrative. It should
In
be
the
in section E.
yeah.
So there's just numbers broken down in D. E is the narrative.
Yeah.
Correct. That's exactly
Okay.
right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
There was something about reference slides are not appearing. I'm assuming that corrected itself. The flyer so the flyer responded to that. And I think that was it.
Okay.
Logic model. I responded to what it is. Let me make sure that I think there was a question. I don't see it now. Logic model attaching it. Was there a question about attaching? Also, can the logic model be within the body of the proposal? Or is it required to be an appendix only? That's a preference thing, but
yeah, it can be in the body of the proposal. I think, and I hate to, I like to try to walk a line between answering a question, a way to provide guidance, and sort of leading or encouraging folks to do things a certain way. I will simply say that I have seen many applicants provide the attachment, right? The actual visual document that shows, activities, resources, outputs, outcomes, short-term, medium, long-term outcomes, et cetera, theory of action, et cetera, root causes. I've seen people provide that visual document under the appendix, but then really break it down in narrative form, in their project narrative. Again, I can't encourage you or tell you to do it that way, but that is usually how it happens. Others will provide a snapshot or almost like a screenshot of the logic model in their project narrative, and that's fine as well. But it's just there's different ways to do it. There isn't sort of a right or wrong way to present your logic model. It should, like your comprehensive logic model should show up under Appendix A in the other attachments form, but there's nothing precluding you or saying that you can't submit it as a part of your project description. Go ahead, Donna.
Um, there are a few questions. Several people want to hear more about the requirement for the one-to-one match on the Academy's projects, and also the reason for the 8% indirect cap on the indirect rates.
Okay.
So the
we
first
are,
question is the
okay.
need for the one-to-one match, and then
Yep.
the second one is talking about the 8% cap.
Got it. Okay. So, so the first question on the match, I guess I would just probably want to know what specifically would folks like to know about the one-to-one match. Yeah, so I just saw a question about a match waiver. Maybe the person who submitted that question could come off mute and just ask specifically what they'd like to hear about the 100% match.
Hi, I the one who posted that initially.
Okay.
I was just curious, why is it specific to the academies? Like, I couldn't see kind of a reasoning why the
Yeah.
academies should require a match, but not the other grants.
That's good. Go ahead, Venetia.
So I'll jump in here. So there is no direct answer to that. This was a program it put in statute by Congress with rules of engagement, in a better way to say it. And those rules, what I could speak to is the purpose of match requirements within grant programs. We have actually all programs except the one in our shop have match requirements. In the case of programs with match requirements, one of the things that gets at that is the fact that it helps applicants, grantees, plan for sustainability of the work. What we are asking for you to think about is, what about this work are you going to be able to sustain as you wind down and the federal dollars are going to come to an end? And so with the one-to-one match, grantees are forced to, in this case, because it's 100%, are forced to actually seek out partnerships, look at in kind, spaces and resources that you have within your disposal that you're going to be bringing to bear to support this work. And so, I mean, I think that's the best way we can sort of give you, but there's no rhyme or reason. It's Congress's decision on, it's pretty much like asking us why the absolute priority is what it is. It's just the nature of how they wanted to build this program out.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's correct. And the answer for the 8% is not that different. It's sort of, there are sort of rules that, are not necessary. These rules are not set, to Venetia's point, by the Effective Educator Development Division in terms of what indirect costs, will look like per program. That's just the rate that is established for the, for the department's, programs, or for this program, I should say, specifically. And generally what we will do is, if folks have sort of further questions, we definitely, can direct you to the indirect cost rate, office for a little bit more context into, what those rules look like and how to meet them. But yeah, that's a little bit outside of our control in terms of, why that sort of 8% rate exists.
The question regarding applying for another grant if you currently, yes, you can.
Mm-hmm.
There's no cap on the number of grants.
That's right.
Can someone answer the question about the program performance measures that are in the chat?
What are GEPRA performance measures for national activities? Are there specific state, city, or national measures that we should be using? No.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just going to say, I just went ahead and put them back on the screen. And so there are not specific requirements, for what the actual assessments have to be. And so, and I don't know, Venetia, maybe that's one you want to speak to. We've gotten that question in the past, and you know, and my understanding is that there's a lot of flexibility around what, you know, what an applicant or what a grantee can actually use as their assessment, as it isn't stipulated. But I don't know if there was any additional context that you wanted to share there.
No, that's correct. So, and I think that gets at the pre and post. I'm
Yep.
assuming that's the same question that
Yes,
is asked
that's what I think so. Yeah.
around pre and post. So pre and post, these are program specific, project specific measures that you are responding to. We will provide you with performance measures that you must respond to and those are called program specific performance measures that will show up in your IPRs or your APRs if you're awarded. And then there are project specific performance measures, pre and post. Again, as you set this up and you're responding to certain selection criteria, you are going to be telling us, you are going to be providing us with baseline information. These selection criteria are important. Or there's one up on the screen, need for projects, 25 points. So within that, you are going to be demonstrating based on data that why there's a need for this project to sort of earn these points. And in the end, of course, they're going to be within the scope of your project. You're going to be talking about what has happened from the beginning pre to that end post. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah.
So there are different levels of measures that you respond to within these grants.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And I think there's a I think the question that I'm seeing is, and maybe, you know, we can clarify further, is it looks like folks are asking if they are required to use their state assessment for any one of these subjects, or if they are able to identify and choose, you know, the sort of assessments that are used for the pre and post assessment. And so I think what we're saying is that you are able to identify the assessment that you would like to use for the pre and post activity assessments.
That's correct. There is no requirement. There's no requirement in this program specifically that states that the data, the assessment has to be a state district level assessment.
Yeah, you're able to identify what that is. All right. So I'm looking at the time, and I appreciate all of your questions, and I would encourage you all to keep them coming. We've got about 7 minutes left, and I'm usually pretty good at timing these things out. I didn't do such a great job this time. Obviously, 90 minutes probably wasn't sufficient. We do have a number of slides left. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to do a really quick overview on this slide. And then I want to speak to the specific sort of nuanced differences between the programs. And then I think what I can do is maybe finish us up in a couple of minutes and then open it up for any final questions that we may have. I think we were going to spend a little bit more time diving into the specific priorities of the National Activities and Academies programs. You guys have seen that language. There's not a lot that I'm going to say that's going to be terribly different than what you've seen already. I try not to really kind of interpret, you know, the language too much during these presentations. But I think we can sort of do a really kind of brief overview and then save a few minutes at the end if that makes sense. So we are documenting these questions. Thank you, Donna. And what we will do is any questions we're not able to answer today, we'll take those back, and then we will update the web page with responses. But we certainly want to make sure that we are responsive to any information. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that spiel and just really kind of quickly dive into a quick overview. And so on the national activity side, so what you guys see, you know, on your screen is sort of a Venn diagram showing the priorities for the programs. And you can see there's a lot of synergy between the programs, you know, between the priorities. On the national activity side, oh, I'm sorry, this is actually it's reversed. On the academy side, I'm sorry, it should be the first one that you see. There are basically two absolute priorities, and so that language that you see there is incorrect, and we'll fix that for you. But on the academy side, The absolute priorities are presidential academies and congressional academies. And the difference there is that, as I mentioned before, the presidential academies really are focusing on the teaching of American history and civics, while the congressional academies are really focused on, on students. And one of the things that I really like about this program is that there is an opportunity for direct programming, specifically for students in this subject matter. And so then you'll see that the Academies program does have a unique, competitive preference priority, which really does speak to utilizing the resources of the national parks, and that competitive preference priority is worth 3 points. And so again, if we go all the way to the right of the Venn diagram, you'll see the absolute priority for the national activities. Remember, the titles are reversed, but we'll fix that for you. But there is a single absolute priority, and it really is focused on the innovative instruction or professional development in American history, civics, and government, and geography. And so I just included in parentheses so that you can see that those absolute priorities are required for each of those submissions. And then competitive preference priority 1 is also unique under the National Activities Program, and it is for innovative activities for civic engagement. And one of the things that is really specific there, and maybe a little different, or a little bit of a distinguishing factor, is that it really does speak to hands-on activities that participants are engaged in. And then in the middle, you'll see these are the things that are common between both the national activities and the Academies programs. CPP2, competitive preference priority 2, is common across both programs. And it really does speak to promoting equity and student access to educational resources and opportunity. And so we're running out of time, but I will really encourage you to look, there, because there is a lot of information that really speaks to the types of settings in which that work should be happening, as well as the types of activities that should be occurring as well. And then the invitational priority is also common across both programs, and we are speaking to, the idea of fostering critical thinking and promoting student engagement in civics education. Did I hear you, Venetia, a moment ago?
No.
Oh, you didn't? Okay, I'm sorry. Sorry, I thought I heard a voice. And so I am going to sort of breeze through these. I'm going to invite you all to really download this slide deck once we review it, or actually, I'm sorry, once we post it on the, oops, I'm so sorry. 1 second. Okay, once we post it on the web page, and I'm going to skip on down to questions and see if we can get 1 or 2 questions before we close out. And again, my apologies on the time. We slipped a little bit. Donna, Joshua, Venetia, any questions that we should be highlighting before we end?
There was a question about the multiple. Oh, I'm sorry, Venetia, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna highlight the question about if organizations apply for multiple grants, are they allowed to expand or extend the work of an original grant? So like not a new, completely different second project, but building and expanding on the original project.
Go ahead, Venetia.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, if you cannot apply for the same grant twice within the same application, within the same competition.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had a prior American history grant, if this is what is being asked, and you are applying for a second to build upon the work of that previous one, that's a new grant application, different competitions, and you are going to be speaking to the work. You may be using the same district, you may be the same partners, you may be that's okay, so long as you're talking about new work, and what that new work looks like.
Yep, that is exactly correct. Oh, sorry. Any, do we have time for maybe one more question? Go ahead, Venetia.
We're also going to encourage you guys. There's a lot of questions coming in that came in. We're also going to encourage you to send your questions into our mailbox, and those, those are going to be answered quickly. These we will post as FAQs, but however, as you're working through, please utilize that access that you have.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, we will definitely use, and actually I'm going to flip to the next slide, just so you can see the links to the web pages, reminder on the application deadline, and that late applications won't be reviewed, but also you can see the inbox there for submitting your intent to apply, as well as any grant questions that you have. To Venetia's point just now, you have the number to the grants.gov help desk as well. But back to the American History and Civics email inbox, we are going to be working to turn around any questions you submit rapidly. So please do feel free to use that as a first source of information and to get your questions answered. To Venetia's point, we are going to compile a list of all the questions that were asked in the chat. And we will follow up with a posting to both of these web pages that you see linked here on the screen, to make sure that you all do get full answers to those questions as well. And also those who are not participating in the webinar today have the opportunity to see not just the questions, but also the responses to them as well. So give us a little bit of time for that, because I do like to vet our responses through our program attorneys before posting anything. So we will make sure that we get those vetted and get them published on the web pages.
Two last things. There was the last question that I'm able to see is a question around which grant would be better fit. We cannot, I just had to respond to that. We cannot give you that answer, neither here or in the inbox. So that is something that you definitely have to make a decision on, or maybe it's both. And so there's also that opportunity. The worst thing can happen is that you don't get the funding. So I would say if you have the bandwidth, apply for both. The GEPRA, someone asked a question about where the GEPRA measures could be found. And so I was actually going through the NIA trying to find the page.
Yeah, they're in the NIA. They're towards the end, somewhere like within the last 5 pages or so of the NIA. You should find the GEPRA measures, and because they're not probably as many measures as you might find in other notices. It's easy to miss them, but you should see a section. I think it says reporting, if I'm not mistaken.
It's page 7 on the NIA.
Page 7 on the NIA?
I believe at least for the Academies one, it's page 7, center column. It says there's a thing that says number 5 performance measures.
Got it. Yes, in the web posting. Yeah, I was thinking of the long, like 50-page version that we submit to them to put on the website. So yeah, yes, page 7. You should find that in the middle column. Yep. Thank you, Michelle. All right. And that
can you clarify if that it's $1 million up to $1 million per year for 3 years? Is that correct?
Yes,
that is correct.
Yes,
thank you.
So possibly up to 3 million at the end of it. So 3 million for one, 5 million for the other.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is exciting. Yeah, thank you so much. Again, my apologies that we had to skip through the sections on priorities. Like I said, you guys will get you will see a link to the recording published to each of the web pages linked above, and then you will also see a link to the slide deck as well. And we should get both of those up within 24 hours. We will follow up later as I mentioned before, with a document that has responses to the questions that were posed here. But I'm really, really excited that so many of you joined us today. We're really, really looking forward to a full and vibrant competition, this summer. So, just want to wish you all the best. And please do, if you have questions, reach out to American History and Civics at ed.gov, and we will be looking forward to your submissions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Omar, you can stay.